So I had a nice introduction for Jason Bohrer. Trust me on this one thing. Heads up the Lignite Energy Council, and big news out of the administration. Although I guess not a big surprise, nonetheless, it's nice to have it finally here. Jason, let's talk a little bit about this. How you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So this wasn't unexpected, right? I mean, really, the president's been talking about some version of this since he was a candidate for president, right?
Right. We all knew this was coming.
So, but the good news is it actually came. It actually showed up. Is this a rollback, or is this sort of a replacement of the Clean Power Plan? How would you characterize what we have today in the way of news?
Well, the Clean Power Plan legally doesn't exist because the Supreme Court ruled that it was an illegal expansion of authority. The EPA acted illegally and inappropriately when they issued the Clean Power Plan. So this can't be a rollback of something that was deemed illegal. It's a step forward for the industry who's been looking for certainty on CO2. And if you believe that CO2 contributes to global climate change, it's a step forward there too, because it actually encourages companies, governments to invest in technology that is affordable and commercially deployable that captures CO2.
Yeah, that's a interesting concept, isn't it? To say, hey, you can make things better, go ahead and invest in it and do it, rather than mandating it or taking people to court or playing the games that have been happening. And, you know, I rarely do I interview you without giving you an opportunity to talk about just how much, you know, the industry has invested in actual dollars and the result of that. I mean, share a little bit of the significance of the investment, but also the results that's brought you related to CO2.
Yeah, right now we're working on several multi-million-dollar projects relating to understanding how CO2 acts in North Dakota's geology underground, as well as understanding how to capture CO2 from existing power plants and technology that would allow us to build a new coal-fired power plant without a stack for emissions. So we're investing millions of dollars across the board on every CO2 challenge that exists. And this rule creates incentives to do more of that. And it rewards states, governments that do those types of things. And it creates the framework that was envisioned when Congress created the Clean Air Act that said, here's the standard, here's how you might do it. States, you know best, go get it done. And that's what's going to happen with this new plan.
Given the work that's been done and is being done here on that regard, EERC and you know, the investment made by the Lignite Energy Council and the Industrial Commission and some areas as well, you know, when you talk about rewards and incentives, do you see North Dakota playing an active role, tapping into some of those to move things along even a little quicker?
Yeah, absolutely. North Dakota's got, in my opinion, the greatest minds in the world working on issues related to coal technology, gasification technology. The Department of Energy recognizes that, and they've turned to North Dakota for expertise and advice, not just on the technology, but on the business case of that as well, is to say, how can we make these technologies successful in the marketplace? We've got a great delegation in place. We've got a history of working with DOE, and we've made it a priority. Regardless of the uncertainty over the Clean Power Plan, this was always in North Dakota's future. The Clean Power Plan threw a wrench into our plans, into our roadmap, and caused us to kind of get off that track that would have got us there sooner for the technologies that work in North Dakota.
Talking to Jason Bohrer from Lignite Energy Council today on the program. So lay out at least what you now know to be how the Department of Energy, the EPA, are going to be regulating the coal industry based on this new finding. And where we find ourselves today? What's different? What's the lay of the land?
So right now, one of the big differences is that EPA is going to its defined role as a regulator of emissions instead of a developer of energy policy. So the EPA's role is to identify things that need to be regulated and coming up with standards that need to be met. The Clean Power Plan was not a CO2 rule. It was an energy policy rearrangement for the entire country. So first big difference is that EPA is reverting to its role as Congress intended, to identify the emission that needs to be controlled and pathways to make that happen. So that's one of the big changes. The second thing is that the Clean Power Plan was really a plan to expand the use of natural gas in the United States. Almost all of the changes that came along with the Clean Power Plan were represented by people switching from coal to natural gas. And it was not necessarily focused on carbon dioxide coming from coal. It didn't incentivize investments in CO2 reduction technologies. And that's what the new plan is. It's actually responsive to the problem articulated by the Supreme Court. Again, whether you like Massachusetts versus EPA or not, the Supreme Court said you got to regulate CO2. The Clean Power Plan just shut down coal and turned on natural gas. This new version creates incentives to actually understand and regulate CO2 better than we do now.
And I imagine, well, we're going to save this for after the break, but when I come back, I want to talk a little bit about the state's role in that. So when you talk about the EPA going back to their intended role of saying, okay, let's set the standards here and let's find a way to regulate it, who better than the states, the 10th Amendment. We'll talk about that and a couple other things related to the announcement from the EPA today, making it official that the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan is in the rearview mirror. It's not the policy of the EPA anymore, and of course that sits in the courts, but it's done. We'll talk more about it with Jason Bohrer of the Lignite Energy Council after this on Energy Matters.
Continuing our conversation with Jason Bohrer from the Lignite Energy Council. So we were talking before about what's being done differently, and we're hearing a lot about the states being given the power from the EPA to regulate this. We've heard a lot about that from Scott Pruitt when he was out here. Hopefully we'll hear about it from his successor, Mr. Wheeler, as well. But what in this plan that's been rolled out will be significant for your industry related to the federal government?
It sets the appropriate standards for state plans, but those guidelines can be flexible enough so a state like North Dakota can choose how it meets it. We don't have to go back and forth, 6 times over the first 15 years, for instance, seeking permission for every minor change we want to make to our CO2 plan. We make a single submission to the EPA and work with them to make sure it meets the guidelines. But the EPA does not have authority to manage the entire energy infrastructure of North Dakota. It simply is managing the power plants within North Dakota that produce CO2 that they're regulating. So the scope of EPA's authority is drastically reduced down to where the Clean Air Act authorizes them, to the point of the power plants where the CO2 is coming from. So you don't have the EPA mandating an energy efficiency program or mandating a cap and trade or any of these things. It's just regulating what the EPA said the problem is, which is CO2.
So the EPA's role is essentially saying, here's the rule, and you need to be in compliance, and your state can be the one that checks that compliance. You guys do it.
Yeah, North Dakota recognized that it's going to have a growing role in how energy is produced in the state, both from coal, oil, and gas, and separated, and it created a new agency separate from the Department of Health, to focus exclusively on environmental issues such as this. So the state is prepared for this. The work they're doing paved the way to make the state's oversight more effective and more stringent and more focused and streamlined than it was before. So everybody's moving toward this point together in a way that is going to have, I think, it will get the benefits that EPA is looking for, but it won't have that job-killing portion that the Clean Power Plan would have had.
All right. Now, I hear a lot of folks saying, really all this means is there's going to be years and years of litigation, and these new rules just set up a big legal fight. Are you anticipating this is going to be tied up in the courts for a while?
Yeah, that was our strategy when the Obama administration issued a rule that was illegal. We would fight it in courts. We always knew that rule was illegal. So, whoever doesn't like the rule, their first recourse is to sue. I don't believe that the anti-energy, anti-growth groups are going to be successful, because this rule is very much in line with what the Clean Air Act articulates. They may not like the outcome, but I think you will find that there are, the consensus is that there is a lot fewer legal loopholes in this than there were with the Clean Power Plan.
So, given that this is sort of at least the way of thinking, this is, good news and a fulfilled campaign promise, and if nothing else, an indication of how they plan to regulate the industry and trust the states. Overall, what kind of an impact do you see on the administration, rather on the industry, with an administration like this? What will this mean long term? Not just this plan, but overall this way of thinking.
Well, I guess let me begin with the premise that this isn't good news for the coal industry. This is good news for the United States, because it represents an administration that is not trying to expand its authority anymore. This is an administration that is trying to live within the bounds of the law. So that's point one. What does it mean long term for the industry? It means that we can tackle the pressing problems that matter to North Dakotans, those 13,000 jobs that depend upon the coal industry in North Dakota. How do we compete in a changing marketplace? The markets become flooded with cheap natural gas, subsidized wind. That's making it harder for coal plants to sell electricity into the markets. This allows us to divert our intellectual bandwidth from complying with an illegal regulation in the Clean Power Plan to identifying marketplace solutions, identifying new market opportunities for coal, and being able to compete in the marketplace with those other forms of energy.
And how is the market overall? I mean, when you look at the other fuel sources that you're competing with and different energy sources that are out there, I mean, obviously all the regulation on your back hasn't helped. Some of that's coming off. What's that mean for the industry's economic health?
There's warning signs. The market is a tough place to be right now because of the different dynamics, such as the cheap natural gas, heavily subsidized wind. We are all competing for the same customers. We're all competing to sell our electricity. So the market is, it's a tough place to be right now. But we're confident in our ability to find a path forward, because we have great minds working on efficiency improvements, on research and development, and emerging marketplace opportunities in the future. But it's not easy. It's no longer a simple matter of shoveling coal into the coal plant and watching the meters spin. It's not that easy anymore.
And you also have the additional fact that North Dakota is an energy export state, right? So whatever energy is generated here, there's way more than we can use. It has to go somewhere. Then you have surrounding states who say, no, we got to have so much wind because it complies with their mandate. So there's a lot of complicating factors in that market right now, isn't there?
Yeah, and North Dakota is blessed with abundant energy resources, whether it's coal, whether it's oil, gas, wind, and we ought to be monetizing all of those things. But we ought to be monetizing them from a vantage point that has a level playing field and allows us to make the most of those energy resources for the longest period of time.
We had a question not too long ago, and I forget where it came in, but it was basically had to do with the coal-powered plants having to ramp up and ramp down related to when wind was available, and I think it was portrayed by folks in the wind industry to say, this is a way we're working together, but somebody on the coal side said that's not a efficient way to produce electricity from coal by going up and going down. Is that right?
Yeah, that's probably that's very accurate. When the wind blows and the coal has to cycle down, that's equivalent to putting your car in fourth gear driving 10 miles an hour. That's not how it's built to run. So if we were truly working together, there would be some better way to coordinate and dial back the wind instead of the coal, but that's not how the market works because the wind is selling for $0. There is a very real cost associated with dialing a coal plant down, and that cost is being borne by the coal plant, which does not want to do that. And it's, so there's a cost that's not being appropriately compensated, and it is not, it is not good for the coal industry.
All right, so I had that one well. I love the insatiable appetite for this story and getting it right and understanding it among our audience. So I'm glad they asked. And Jason, you're always great to get us answers. Appreciate your time today. Been a busy few weeks here with Rick Perry visiting. You were part of that panel, and now, of course, this news from the administration. So I know it's busy, and we thank you for the time.
Well, thank you. This has been great. Appreciate it.
You bet. Jason Bohrer from Lignite Energy Council. When we come back, we're going to talk